You're watching Deal Makers. Power sector is starved of coal, gas, cash, and everything seems to be up for sale. Well, I have two deal makers who have cracked the last two power deals. Kuljit Singh, the partner of Transactions Advisory Services in Infrastructure at Ernst & Young, and Gaurav Gupta, Managing Director and Head of Macquarie Capital in India. Gentlemen, so good to have you on the show. Now, first starting with Kuljit. Kuljit, you've just advised on the large transaction between JP Power Ventures and Taka. Does this deal mean that probably the scenario in power sector is taking a turn in the positive direction?
Definitely, this deal signals that there is a positive sentiments towards power sector. If you really look at the historical scenario in the power sector, you'll find that deals have always been happening in this sector. Earlier, it used to be the private equity funds used to dominate this deal space. But now there is a change, and it's the international strategic players as well as the buyout funds who are coming into India, into the power space. Because from a global perspective, the size of the market and the kind of opportunities that are there in the Indian space are simply not there anywhere else in the world. So definitely from that perspective, it's a very, very important development, and definitely things are looking very positive for the Indian power sector.
Gaurav, you have just done the Blanco Greenco deal. Do you think that things are really looking positive, as Kuljit was saying?
I think it's still wait and watch for a lot of these strategics, and I think Kuljit mentioned too, there being a fair amount of financial sponsor interest in the sector. We've seen two renewable deals happen. It's probably a sector which has less regulatory issues to deal with. But thermal continues to be the biggest sector in the space. And I would say that, I wouldn't say that we are beginning to see the turning of this sector. I think it's still wait and watch.
All right, wait and watch. But Kuljit, coming to you then, as an M&A expert, how active is the deal scenario in the power sector, do you think? Are there going to be many deals going forward?
Yes, we think that the M&A activity will increase in the Indian power space. Right now what we are seeing in the market is there are several sellers in the Indian markets, and relatively there are fewer buyers, and the buyers who are there are right now focused more towards renewable energy. But we think this trend is going to change significantly going forward. We'll have newer players coming into the renewable energy space, but along with that, I think what's going to happen is there'll be newer international players coming into the thermal power space as well. Because if you look at this sector, you find that there are a host of policy measures which Government of India has been undertaking, which are hugely positive for this sector.
What do you think? Because thermal power, gas power are the sectors which really need cash. And so far, what we have seen from the investments that we have seen in the last two deals, there have been interest only in the safer and less riskier assets like the renewable energy space.
I think to answer your question, I mean, if you look at gas and coal, I think gas has fundamental issues with regard to the fuel supply. And I think till we see a resolution around that, I think that's a sector we don't see will see significant activity or any activity at all. Coming to thermal assets, I mean, that's right. Anybody looking at scale, wanting to do this from a scale perspective, that is the sector to kind of invest in. But there again, I think people are being cautious. They will wait for greater regulatory clarity, or then look for assets which are probably operational and do not have issues with regard to fuel and some of the other regulatory constraints. So I tend to agree with what Kuljit mentioned. We may begin to see activity also on the thermal side, but I think it will be restricted to assets which don't have some of these regulatory issues.
All right. Regulatory issues have been one of the biggest problems that have been plaguing this particular sector. But Kuljit, what are those challenges that are still holding back the deal flow in India?
If there is a requirement for the original shareholders to remain invested in the project for a long period of time, then obviously there is no transaction which is possible. The second thing that is a problem from a government policy perspective is that whenever there is a movement of assets or of shareholding, various government authorities will come and demand their pound of flesh from those transactions. They may be in the form of taxes, duties, etc. So that also spoils the financials of a transaction.
How do you react to that?
So I think if we step back and if we look at what is the big issue that investors see with India, I think the biggest issue is really the regulatory logjam that we've been seeing for the last 2 to 3 years. And this has clearly been impacting sectors where you probably need so many more approvals, whether it's acquisition of land, environmental approvals, water. So I think more fundamentally, what investors and what is really going to spur deal making is going to be putting together a conducive framework where everybody gets the confidence that there is a process, that process will be adhered to in a defined timeline. If you really look at now coming specifically to the power sector, I think there are still some challenges that remain which apply to the sector, and these could be with regard to fuel, these could be regard to PPAs, and I think till such time as both these things are not resolved, I think the deal activity or just the general investment, be it from an Indian corporate or from a foreign investor, would be very, very weak.
Right. So pertinent point there. So these are the challenges which are probably holding back investments into the power sector. We'll take a short break at this point, but we will continue the discussion on whether there is a real revival seen in the power deals in India. Stay tuned for more on this discussion.